When I first married Nathan Bell, I thought I was marrying into a family, not an institution. I came from a world of homemade dinners, second-hand couches, and polite Sunday church services, where people actually cared how you were doing, not just what your last name was. So when I said I do to Nathan, I wasn't naive. I knew his family had money. I just didn't realize wealth could come with its own culture, one I wasn't invited into, only expected to orbit. The Bells were old money, the kind of family where everyone's voice was just a few decibels too low to be warm, and their compliments felt like verdicts with sugar on top. The first time I met his mother, Margaret, she looked me over from my shoes to my split ends and smiled like she'd just found a typo in a contract. So she said, stirring her tea without looking up, "This is the girl from the scholarship program. Not Sophie, not Nathan's girlfriend. Just the girl." Nathan swore she'd warm up, that she was just cautious, protective. But even on our wedding day, she didn't smile. Not in the photos, not when we cut the cake, not when she toasted us and said, "Here's to new beginnings, and may we all rise to the occasion." I remember feeling my knees lock when she said that, like I had just been given an assignment I hadn't studied for, and the whole room was watching. After the wedding, Nathan and I moved into one of the Bell guest estates temporarily. A transition period, he called it, before we found our own place. What he didn't say, or maybe didn't see, was that I'd be treated more like a resident intern than a newlywed. The estate was breathtaking. High ceilings, marble floors, those long hallways where your footsteps echo, no matter how softly you walk. And staff. Lots of staff. But somehow I still ended up doing everything myself. When Nathan was away on work trips, which was often I'd eat alone, Margaret didn't invite me to her dinners or include me in her social luncheons. But she always seemed to find reasons to have me help out. "Sophie, be a dear and set the table. Would you mind arranging the tea trays? You've got such a steady hand, you'd be marvelous with the wine glasses." It wasn't framed as servitude, it was pitching in, but I knew the difference. The housekeepers didn't speak to me like I was one of them or one of the family. I was just floating, somewhere in between. The worst part wasn't what Margaret said, it was what she didn't say. The silence at breakfast, the way her eyes flicked past me at social events, the subtle corrections whenever I tried to make a suggestion. "Oh, I wouldn't do it that way, but then again you wouldn't know." No raised voice, no confrontation, just constant erosion, like she was trying to rub me out of the picture one sideways glance at a time. I told myself I was overreacting, that I just needed to prove myself. Be graceful, make fewer mistakes, be adaptable. So I smiled. I said thank you when handed passive-aggressive compliments. I volunteered to help around the house. I dressed more conservatively. I even started watching the way I held my wine glass, because Margaret once commented that I gripped it like a waitress. That one stuck with me. Nathan was sweet when he was around, but I think part of him genuinely didn't see what was happening. He was raised in that world. To him, Margaret's coldness was just how she is, and he figured her asking me to help at luncheons was just her way of including me. I didn't have the energy to explain how being asked to serve people who didn't even bother remembering my name wasn't inclusion, it was humiliation. Wearing pearls. I began to shrink. Not all at once, but gradually, like a flame dimming because someone keeps walking by and cupping it without noticing. I stopped texting my college friends back. I stopped laughing at my own jokes. I stopped wearing the yellow dress Nathan once said made me look like summer because Margaret called it childish. I told myself this was the price of love. That once Margaret saw how well I fit in, she'd stop treating me like a house guest with a questionable resume. But deep down, I think I knew the truth. She never wanted me to fit in. She wanted me to stay small. To remember I was just the wife from nowhere who got lucky. But one afternoon, just an ordinary Thursday, that started to change. Because someone saw it. Someone who wasn't part of the family. Someone who had no stake in my performance. Someone who simply noticed the quiet cruelty and finally said something. It was a Friday afternoon when Margaret came into the east sitting room, the one with the tall windows and the velvet curtains she didn't let anyone touch, and told me her friends would be coming by for a light refreshment. I had just finished folding laundry. Not mine, not Nathan's, just towels that somehow got left in the dryer from the morning maid's rotation. Margaret looked at me like she had just remembered I existed. "You'll be around later?" "Yes, I'd love a hand setting up the hors d'oeuvres." It wasn't a question. It never was. I nodded like I always did, and followed her into the kitchen. The estate cook was gone for the day. Something about an early weekend. Margaret opened a cupboard and pointed toward boxes of fine crackers, goat cheese and smoked salmon. Nothing fancy, she said, which of course meant nothing less than perfect. I plated everything, carefully arranging things the way she liked, color-balanced minimalist with the gold-tipped cocktail forks, fanned out like museum pieces. When I brought the first tray out to the sunroom where she'd set up for her guests, she gave a once-over and said, "Lovely dear. You do have a steady hand. Thank goodness." That was the first compliment I'd gotten from her in weeks. I swallowed the bitter aftertaste and nodded. They started arriving around 4, all high heels, designer sunglasses, and voices like clinking glass. Margaret greeted them with air kisses and laughter that only appeared when she was in a group. I stood back unnoticed, a background character in my own house, or what I still foolishly thought was our house. Then Margaret turned to me, smile polite, voice crisp. "Sophie, could you bring out the drinks tray?" "Not?" "Would you mind?" "Not." "Can I trouble you?" Just a quiet command dressed up like community. I nodded, and I brought it out, a silver tray with rosé, 2 sparkling waters, and 1 neat scotch for Miss Vivian, who only drinks brown liquor because wine gives her sugar headaches. The tray was heavy. My wrist hurt, but I smiled like my life depended on it, because in some strange way it felt like it did. When I returned to the kitchen, Margaret followed behind and added a few more light bites to the list. Fruit tarts, the lemon curd ones with candied zest. She pointed at the oven with a sigh. "You don't mind, do you? The staff is off early and you're always so good with timing." Translation: "You're here and you're not paid, so I can pretend it's gracious." I was halfway through plating when I heard the laughter. That high-pitched, breathy kind of laughter that doesn't come from joy, it comes from performance. I peeked around the corner and saw them all seated, Margaret in the center, like a monarch, and I realized I wasn't being included. I was being staged. One of them glanced at me and said, "She's so efficient." Like I was a machine, not a woman, not family, just a convenient silhouette with good balance. After everything was served, I stood awkwardly by the kitchen entrance, unsure if I should stay or retreat upstairs like a dismissed extra. Margaret caught my hesitation and said without turning, "You can stand by. I may need you to refresh the glasses." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I wish I could say I found the courage to walk out right then. I wish I could tell you I said something sharp, something powerful. But the truth, I stayed. I stood there for almost an hour, quiet, smiling, invisible, while they talked about charity events, ski trips, and whose daughter was engaged to which senator's nephew. I stood there while someone asked Margaret, "So, how is married life treating your daughter-in-law?" And Margaret, without missing a beat, said, "She's adjusting." Bless her, as if I were a rescue dog learning how to behave indoors. When they finally left one by one, each complimenting the lovely service, Margaret turned to me and smiled. "Well done, Sophie. See? A little poise goes a long way." I didn't reply. I just nodded again like I was wired to. But something cracked in me that day. Not all the way. Not enough to rage. Not enough to cry. But enough to realize that if I didn't draw the line, I'd disappear completely behind the silver tray and the polite nods. And what's worse than being hated, being erased while smiling. That night, I told Nathan what happened. He was lying on the couch, laptop on his chest, half listening. When I got to the part about standing through the whole event like staff, he said, she probably just didn't realize how that looked. And then, "She grew up with help around the house, babe. It's normal for her." I stared at him. I didn't know what was worse, the way Margaret used me, or the fact that he didn't even see it. So I stopped talking, not out of spite, but because I realized I was the only one treating this like a problem. To everyone else in this house, I wasn't a guest. I was decoration, disposable, pleasant, quiet, adaptable decoration. And maybe that's why the next time she asked me to help, I didn't just nod. I paused, just long enough to wonder what would happen if I said no. It was only a week later when Margaret hosted another luncheon. This time it was bigger. 12 guests, all women, all dressed in coordinated pastels, all speaking in that rehearsed dialect of wealth, the kind where compliments sound like negotiations, and every smile hides a power play. I wasn't told in advance. No heads up, no polite "Sophie, would you mind assisting?" Just a knock on my door that morning from one of the housekeepers. "Mrs. Bell says you'll be helping with the terrace luncheon today." I sat on the edge of the bed in silence, staring at the message like it was a court summons. No, please, no option. Just an expectation not from the staff, but from the queen of the house herself. And I complied. Of course I complied. I pulled on a pale blue dress that Margaret once said made me blend in nicely. I tied my hair back. No earrings, no lipstick, no identity. By noon, the terrace looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Florals in crystal vases, napkins folded into birds, tiny silver spoons for the crème brûlée that had to be torched just minutes before serving, which of course I was expected to do. As the guests arrived, I felt myself switch off. I smiled, I nodded, I poured. I played the character she wanted, the polite daughter-in-law who knows her place. But I wasn't in the room. Not really. I was hovering just outside of myself, watching this version of me go through the motions like a well-trained prop. And then it happened. I was setting down a tray of tiny cucumber sandwiches when one of the women, a guest I'd never met before, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, snapped her fingers at me. Snapped. Her fingers. Like I was a dog. Like I was invisible until needed. "Sweetheart," she chirped without looking up. "Can you be a darling and bring me more of that sparkling elderflower water?" Her tone was light, casual, as if snapping for someone was as natural as blinking. I froze, not because of the request, but because of the sound. That little click pierced something in me I didn't know was still whole. Margaret, sitting just a few feet away, laughed breezily and said, "Sophie's such a help, isn't she? Always ready to pitch in." And everyone smiled, like I was a well-behaved housemaid who should feel honored to be spoken to so kindly. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. The tray felt like it was welded to my palms. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For a second I genuinely thought I was going to cry, not because of the insult, but because of the part of me that wanted to say nothing, that wanted to be good, still, quiet, the part of me that had been trained to endure. But instead of tears, I smiled, because I'd learned that smiling was the best way to make people underestimate the temperature of your rage. I turned without a word and walked to the kitchen. I brought back the water. I handed it to her. She didn't say thank you. Of course she didn't. When the luncheon ended, Margaret pulled me aside before I could escape to the solace of my room. "Darling, don't take offense at Vivian. She's old-fashioned. That's just how she was raised." I nodded, but inside something snapped into clarity. Margaret thought this was normal, expected. She believed people like Vivian had earned the right to click at people like me, because in her eyes, I wasn't Sophie Nathan's wife, a whole person, someone with dreams and limits. I was the girl who got lucky, the one who should say thank you for being tolerated. That night, I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. Same dress, same face, but for the first time I felt like a stranger looking back at me, like someone I couldn't defend anymore, like someone I'd failed. And in that moment, I made a quiet decision. The next time someone snapped at me, it wouldn't end in silence. The invitation came in gold leaf. Not addressed to me, of course. It was for Nathan from his mother for a formal dinner in honor of a longtime family associate and patron. Nathan read the card and passed it to me over breakfast, like he was handing me a receipt. "We'll need to be dressed by 6. It's at the estate." "The estate where we live," I said dryly. He didn't laugh. He never did anymore. That evening, I wore the dress Margaret once said made me look appropriately elegant. It was navy-fitted conservative, the kind of dress that disappears into a room instead of announcing anyone's arrival. Nathan wore a tux. We looked like a couple from a painting, one of those old portraits where no one's smiling and everyone looks like they're hiding something, which in our case wasn't far from the truth. The guests arrived in sleek cars. They smelled of expensive perfume and quiet judgment. Laughter trickled through the hallways before the coats were even taken. I stood at the edge of the dining room, hands clasped, waiting for instruction. Like a server. Like staff. Not once did anyone refer to me as Nathan's wife. They just nodded in my direction with the kind of dismissive grace people give to people they don't plan to remember. Margaret was in her element. She sat at the head of the table like a queen, every movement deliberate, every smile precise. And then right as dinner began, she turned to me and said, "Sophie, dear, would you mind assisting with service tonight? There's no one else available, and I know you're such a natural." There were at least 4 staff members in the hallway, but none of them were me. None of them were Margaret's favorite person to control. I glanced at Nathan. He didn't even look up. He was swirling his wine. I said yes, because I always did. The next hour was a blur of porcelain champagne and aching feet. I carried soup. I collected empty salad plates. I refilled glasses with the practiced grace of someone who was no longer surprised by her own humiliation. One guest even asked if I had ever considered catering full-time. I smiled and said nothing, because if I opened my mouth, the room would hear something they weren't ready for. Toward dessert, as I was lighting the final table candle, a tiny ritual. Margaret insisted on for warmth. I heard one of the guests murmur, "I had no idea she was so hands-on." They all laughed. Margaret replied, "She keeps herself busy. It's good for her. It was too much." I turned slowly toward the table. My hands were shaking. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry, but I was about to say something I couldn't take back. I felt the words rising bitter sharp, burning like acid behind my teeth. But before I could speak, he did. A voice behind me, low, calm, and unmistakably firm, cut through the room. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Everyone turned. Ethan, the family's assigned bodyguard. He had been standing at his usual post by the back entrance, quiet and invisible. Until now. His eyes were fixed on Margaret. Not hostile, not aggressive, just steady. Margaret blinked, thrown. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" he repeated with Mrs. Bell. "Because she's not staff." The room fell dead silent. No laughter. No clinking glasses. Just the sound of a boundary being drawn like a line in wet concrete. Margaret tried to laugh it off. "Of course not. It's all in good fun. Sophie loves helping." She looked at me, eyes hard. "Don't you, dear," I didn't answer. Not with words. Just placed the candle lighter gently on the tablecloth and walked out. I didn't look back. Because if I did, I think I would have screamed. Later that night, I found a note outside my bedroom door. From Ethan. Written in neat, unadorned handwriting. "You don't have to let anyone decide who you are. Especially not in rooms that require you to serve just to stay seated." I cried for the first time in months. Not from sadness. From recognition. From finally feeling seen. That night the dinner ended early. Margaret's guests said their goodbyes faster than usual, some with tight-lipped smiles, others with awkward nods in my direction, like I had just become something dangerous, something unpredictable. I sat in the small library, down the hall, from the formal dining room, fingers still trembling, shoes off, dress wrinkled. I was waiting for Nathan. Not because I expected comfort, I wasn't that naive anymore. I just wanted to see which version of him would show up, the man who used to tell me he'd protect me from the world, or the one who'd been watching it, wound me in real time, and said nothing. He entered 20 minutes later. Didn't sit. Didn't ask if I was okay. Just crossed his arms and exhaled sharply. "So now you've made it a spectacle." I blinked. "Excuse me," calling in Ethan like some dramatic defense move. "You humiliated her in front of everyone." I laughed. Quiet bitter cracked around the edges. I humiliated her. "You could have just let it go." There it was. The motto of every enabler. Let it go. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. I stood. She used me. She paraded me around like help. She let her guests snap at me like I was a butler. "And you think I should have just smiled through it?" "You knew how things worked before you moved in," he said. And that I realized was the heart of it. He never planned for me to be equal here. He expected me to adjust, to shrink politely, to perform obedience and call it maturity. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just walked past him out of the room, down the hallway, and into the quiet courtyard behind the kitchen. Ethan was standing near the back gate, eyes forward. I approached, unsure if I should say anything. But he spoke first. "She'll spin it. I know," I said. "They all will." "Yeah." A pause. "You okay?" I looked up at the sky. It was dark but clear. Stars sharp like pinpricks through velvet. "I will be." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Most people in that house wouldn't have said anything. They've been trained not to." "So why did you?" I asked. "Because you looked like someone who'd finally reached the last straw, and someone had to see it before you disappeared altogether." I nodded. For the first time in weeks, I felt my lungs fully expand. Not because anything had been fixed, but because someone had noticed the collapse. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bedroom floor next to the suitcase I hadn't used in months, and began packing it slowly. Not out of rage, not to make a scene, just because I was done. Done apologizing for being human. Done justifying my presence. Done playing house in a mansion built on power plays. Margaret didn't come to see me the next morning. Nathan was gone before I woke up. Only Ethan lingered near the gate as I loaded the trunk of my small car. He didn't say goodbye. He just nodded once, like we'd both survived something. Like he knew I wasn't running away. I was walking out with what was left of myself, and beginning to build something new. I left quietly. No slammed doors, no final confrontation, no dramatic speeches. Just one small suitcase, one duffel bag, and my dignity pieced back together in the dark while the house slept. I left a note for Nathan, not because he deserved one, but because I did. It said, "You once told me you loved me because I never made you feel small, but I was never supposed to make myself smaller to keep that illusion alive. I hope someday you understand the difference." I drove through the early morning fog with no music, no map, no plan. Just silence, the kind that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean, like a reset, like the kind of quiet you earn after surviving a storm that didn't leave debris, just new space. I moved into a modest apartment on the edge of the city. Nothing fancy. A fourth-floor walk-up with squeaky floors and chipped paint and neighbors who say hello without scanning your outfit first. For the first few weeks, I didn't unpack everything. I left boxes sealed as if part of me still believed I might have to go back. But I didn't. Not once. Not for closure. Not for just one more conversation. Not even to get the silk scarf Margaret borrowed and never returned. I got a job at a community center. Low pay, long hours. But every day I worked with women who were rebuilding just like me. Some from worse. Some from quieter versions of the same thing. And it was there while teaching a class on financial planning for new mothers that I heard a young woman say, "I thought love meant staying even when it hurt because leaving felt like failing." And I looked her in the eyes and told her, "Sometimes leaving is the bravest thing you can do. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself." I never heard from Margaret again. No apology, no olive branch. Just silence, the kind she always wanted from me. Nathan emailed me once. It was short. No subject line. "Hope you're doing okay." I still think about that night. I never replied. Not because I hated him, but because I forgave myself more in his absence than I ever did in his presence. Sometimes I still think about that moment on the terrace. The fingers snapping. The laughter. The way Margaret looked at me like I was a story she was rewriting in real time. But I no longer flinch. Because I know who I was in that moment. Not a servant, not a stranger, not a project. I was a woman, trying to hold herself together with grace no one bothered to recognize. And now? Now I don't need recognition. I need peace. And I have it. I still have the note Ethan left me. I keep it in a small frame above my desk. You don't have to let anyone decide who you are, especially not in rooms that require you to serve just to stay seated. It reminds me of everything I walked away from, and everything I walked toward. This isn't a revenge story. No fortunes lost, no public takedowns. It's something quieter. It's about reclaiming yourself after being slowly erased, not with rage, but with resolution. Not with noise, but with a firm, unwavering no more. I wasn't weak when I left that house. I was finally strong enough to stop asking permission to exist. And I hope if anyone reading this sees themselves in that same mirror I used to avoid, you'll know, you don't need someone else to name your worth. You've had it all along. You just forgot where you hid it. Now it's time to take it back.